welcome back. In the previous video, I told you that in these 2 weeks we would be discussing moral philosophy about the future and in relation to AI. In the previous week's readings, you saw some of the most important ideas that pertain to this discussion about how high-risk technologies might impact human life and human society and all the responsibilities that come with high-risk inventions, with technologies that might be posing important risks to humans, and how we should think about that. This week, we will dive a little bit deeper into moral philosophy. What I want us to understand from these week's readings and from the thought experiment that we are about to discuss is that there is a very long and important discussion about the responsibility towards the future, and especially in relation to how technological development impacts this future. And in the recent discourse, this is known as the debate about long-termism. Now, what is long-termism? It's exactly this view, or even movement, you could say, that we ought to take action to protect and ensure the flourishing of humanity in the long-term future, because exactly there is the sense of moral obligation, moral responsibility towards future people and future generations. Now, to make this idea of the future a little bit more concrete, I would like you to imagine yourself, and in particular different versions of yourself. So first, think of younger versions of yourself. Let's say go back to 2015 and think of yourself when you were maybe in school, or maybe you were working, or you were doing whatever you were doing, and try to think what this person thinks, and try to recollect what it's like to be that person. And then imagine future versions of yourself. So imagine you've graduated with a degree from Queen's College, you have started a new job, maybe you have certain relationships that are very valuable to you, and so on. What do you feel is the connection between these different people? Are you the same person? Is this you that you constantly are attached to, the past self, the present self, and the future self? So this is the first thought experiment here. And in philosophy, and in particular metaphysics of personal identity, we treat this as a problem of whether there is continuity in that person, and exactly in the personal identity, in this I. It was me back then, it's me now, it's going to be me in the future. So this metaphysical continuity in my personhood creates a sense of moral obligation or moral responsibility. So for example, if you're thinking about graduating in the future, you think of, okay, I want this future me to have this degree, so I'm going to be putting a lot of effort right now in the present to have this future achievement for that future person. And so you interpret this continuity as, I'll have to do a series of things. There's a series of steps I'll have to take for the sake of that future person being happy and flourishing. So this is one way to understand the responsibility towards the future, thinking about it in terms of me as a person right now, and my future self, and what I owe to that person, and what are the necessary steps to live up to the expectations I have for that future person. Now, let's scale that to a different level. Let's go from your individual level, from myself, from me as one single person, to humanity, to the human species, to a collective of people. And now let's ask this question: is there responsibility towards these future humans that you're not connected to? Uh, or you may be connected to, if you'd like to make it a little bit more specific and easier to imagine. Consider perhaps a responsibility you may have to your children or grandchildren and so on, people that you are connected to. But the argument applies much more broadly, just about future human beings. And so the question is, do we owe it to this future people to make sure that humanity continues to exist? To make sure that there is a natural environment that they can enjoy, that there are natural resources they can use, that there's life that they can continue, that the human species is doing well and can continue to do well. And then the follow up question is, what do we have to do now if we answered the previous question affirmatively in order to create the conditions for this good, positive, flourishing future for this future people? And so this is the framework for you to think about this week's readings. How do we position ourselves in regard to future people? What are the expectations we have? And the moral expectations in particular, right? When we think about moral obligation, this is something to take very seriously. This is not just something that we have the option to do or not to do, right? You understand that by obligation, we mean something way stricter. There is a necessity for us right now, for example, to not create a technology that would destroy the future, or to not create a technology too early without sufficient safety measures that would potentially ruin that future for these people. So this is the general framework that is helpful for you to think about the readings for this week. You now have some context for how to read the papers, but I thought it would be useful for you if we did the standard going through the paper together. So I mentioned in the previous video this term long-termism. What does it mean? It means that the long-term future matters. There is a moral obligation towards future people. So in this paper, we will see what's the argument for long-termism. We'll see why this might be true, why some people might want to defend this view. So we start with this: future people count. This is the important idea here. There could be a lot of them, so you should think from a point of view of consequentialist ethics, that more people in the calculation carry more moral value, moral weight. And on the other hand, we can make their lives go better. So we are, like I said before, we could influence the conditions that could create a good future for them. So this is not controversial, but at the same time, we don't often talk about future people. We know they count. We don't really count them because they're not here yet. They cannot really bargain with us. They cannot trade with us. They are no way represented. They cannot tell us what they wish to happen that will impact their future and their life, and what we could do differently if we wanted to satisfy their wishes and take into account their preferences for that good future. So, while the idea that future people count is common sense, it's not clear how to take into account the hopes, the joys, the pains, the regrets of future people because they don't yet exist. And it's very difficult to conceptualize what it means to have a life when you're not alive. It's very difficult for us to model these people and to think about their future preferences if they're not yet here. And this is where things get kind of tricky, right? So, again, it's helpful to use a thought experiment. Imagine what future people would think looking back at us debating questions about the value of different things we appreciate right now, things we cherish right now. And imagine what they would think. Maybe they would think that some of the things we care a lot about are more or less valuable. Distance in time is like distance in space. These people live very far away from us in the future, and it's difficult for us to imagine what they would think of us. But that doesn't make them any less real. And it's pretty common sense to want to protect the future. You know this proverb, right? A society grows great when old men plant trees under whose shade they will never sit, right? This caring about the future, caring about the well-being of future people, even though it's not gonna be me partaking in that good future. And the idea that we care about the future is deeply ingrained in our society. We have museums, we have parks, we have nature, right? We know that there's valuable knowledge in the present, and we try to create the institutions that will preserve all the good things and pass them to future generations. So this idea of we need to care about future generations is not new. It's actually very much common sense. But you may think, well, okay, there are many problems in this long-term future, or there are many things we can do for this long-term futures and these human beings that will live in those. However, there are people around us that may be suffering right now. So this is a clear counter-argument to the view. Should you care more about the people around you that may need your help, or should you work very hard to create the conditions of the good future, or preventing future suffering in this very large number of future people? And then, like I said before, you may understand your relationship to future people differently depending on how connected you are to those people. So if, for example, then they are your own descendants, you may think differently from abstractly imagining future people. So you'll think differently about what you could do for your children and grandchildren versus what you would do for a bunch of people that might just live in an abstract time, in an abstract point in the future of humanity. That said, the calculus that this consequentialist tradition I mentioned you cares a lot about estimates that this number of people is very, very large. So from an ethical point of view, there might be a moral responsibility to work for the good future of all these people just because there's so many lives in this future, and therefore there's so much value in protecting these lives and making sure that they will have a good future and they won't be suffering for the rest of eternity, for example. And just to get a sense of this very large number of people we are talking about, you see, the scale is billions of people at this point. We have this very, very helpful graph, okay? So think about representing the people, the future people. So we stay at current population levels and live on Earth for 500 million years. And let's see how many are all the future people. Okay, so you see that representing visually gives you a sense of what's at stake. Of course, this diagram is way shorter than what number we are referring to here. The full version would fill 20,000 pages. Okay, saturating this book 100 times over. So you understand the numbers we're talking about. It's difficult to imagine big numbers. It's difficult to imagine what this means. But we're attempting here to make it a little bit more concrete, to see that these are human lives. These are people that could exist and they could have good lives. And it may be up to us to make sure that this happens. And it may be up to us to prevent a catastrophe. And this circles back to the beginning of the existential risk discussion. This is what existential danger refers to. It means that all these lives will never come to exist, exactly because humanity will no longer be there. So the rest of the paper gives you more details on what this means, on what exactly the moral change looks like when you save so many lives, or when you ensure that the future goes well, because exactly of this calculus. And I think this is one of the important considerations to have, that it's not just climate change, as you have learned from this course. There are many things that can go wrong. And in particular, we talked about AI in its most powerful forms could significantly transform the future of humanity, and it could significantly make a big impact on whether these lives will come to exist or not. And so I would encourage you to read this chapter very carefully and read the other two papers carefully as well. Especially now that we're approaching the end of the course, seeing the bigger picture of the philosophical problem and discourse for making technologies safe, for understanding the moral value of protecting human life, and seeing if at any point you have any counter arguments that could attack the views that we've seen in this course. But this week should help you situate the AI risk problem a little bit better and understand why this point in history might be particularly crucial for these future generations and the future of humanity more broadly.